Welcome to a Hebraic Mindset Moment. These short teachings restore understanding from a Hebraic covenant perspective. Clear, direct, and foundational. Each builds towards deeper study while standing on its own. Let's return to a Hebraic mindset. Most people struggle with Scripture not because the Bible is unclear, but because they were never taught how covenant actually works. But let me ask you something. If Scripture truly comes from Yahuwah, if it reveals one will, one purpose, one kingdom, why does it feel confusing to so many sincere believers? Why do verses seem to pull in opposite directions? Why does obedience feel essential in some passages and uncomfortable in others? Why does judgment sound out of place if grace is central? Those are not rebellious questions. They are honest ones. From Genesis to Revelation, Scripture operates covenantally. With Scripture, order, progression, and purpose. So, if the Word itself is ordered, what does it mean when our understanding isn't? This series exists to ask that question before rushing into answers. Most believers don't openly say the Bible contradicts itself. But be honest, haven't you felt the tension? You read one passage and think, that makes sense. Then you read another and wonder how they fit together. Grace here, obedience there, mercy in one place, judgment in another. So what are we usually told to do with that tension? Pick the verses we are comfortable with, build theology around what feels safe, and explain away the rest. But did Scripture ever invite us to choose sides within the Word? Yahusha said people go astray because they do not know the Scriptures. Not because the Scriptures failed, but because it was mishandled. So here's the real question. If Scripture is consistent, what happens when our method of reading isn't? So let's ask ourselves another question. What if the problem isn't what Scripture says, but that we were trained to force everything into one idea? Usually that idea is salvation. So ask yourself this. Why does obedience feel threatening instead of natural? Why does endurance sound optional? Why does judgment feel awkward or even embarrassing to talk about? Could it be because covenant was flattened into a single moment instead of understood as a structure? Scripture was never designed to be reduced that way. And when it is, the parts that don't fit start to feel dangerous. Not because they are, but because the framework can't carry them. A flat gospel feels simple, but simplicity that collapses Scripture isn't biblical clarity. So what does this kind of framework actually produce? Do we see lives trained for obedience or arguments armed with verses? Do we see endurance or constant offense when Scripture challenges comfort? Do we see formation or information without transformation? Yahuwah said his people were destroyed for lack of knowledge, not because they lacked access, but because they lacked understanding. James warned that hearing without doing leads to self-deception. So here's the uncomfortable question. If our theology produces agreement without obedience, is it actually covenant faith? And if not, what's missing? Covenant is not emotional language meant to inspire. It is ordered relationship meant to govern life. Yahuwah does not reveal covenant randomly. He builds it. Identity is established. Authority is recognized. Instruction is given. Faithfulness is lived. Consequences are applied. Continuity is preserved. Fulfillment unfolds. So here's the question we should be asking. If covenant is built, not improvised, why do we try to interpret Scripture without understanding its structure? There is one covenant, but it operates across layers. Some passages establish identity. Some establish authority. Some define how covenant life is lived. Some address consequences. Some preserve continuity. Some reveal fulfillment. Scripture isn't contradicting itself. It is functioning structurally. So ask yourself this: what happens when we try to answer every question from the same layer? Confusion isn't the result of too much Scripture. It is the result of ignoring how covenant actually works. All throughout Scripture, it is consistently revealing covenant in layers. Identity, who the covenant is with. Authority, who has the right to command. Terms, how covenant life is lived. Witness, how faithfulness is demonstrated. Blessings and curses, covenant consequences. Continuity, covenant preserved through time. Fulfillment, covenant brought to fullness. Same covenant, different functions, each layer necessary. And most doctrinal conflict happens when these layers are confused or collapsed. There's a reason covenant is revealed in 7 layers, and why Scripture never stops at 7. Creation unfolds in 7 days, and then life continues. The weekly cycle reaches the Sabbath, and then renewal moves forward. Sukkot lasts 7 days, followed by the 8th great day. Circumcision happens on the 8th day, entry into the covenant. Consecration is followed by service, and completion is followed by movement. 7 establishes order. 8 activates what was established. This is why this series focuses on the 7 layers of covenant structure and culminates in the 8th great layer, where covenant moves from understanding into lived obedience. Most theological arguments don't happen because people reject Scripture. They happen because people argue across covenant layers without realizing it. One verse addresses identity, another addresses obedience, another addresses fulfillment. So ask yourself this: what happens when every passage is forced to answer the same question? Confusion is guaranteed. But when covenant layers are recognized, Scripture aligns instead of competing. Lawless faith doesn't usually deny belief. It removes structure. It collapses covenant into confession alone and treats obedience as optional. And Yahusha warned that many would claim him while rejecting covenant order. So here's the sobering question: if faith never produces obedience, what kind of faith is it? Structure is what protects belief from deception. End-time deception doesn't begin by denying faith. It begins by dissolving covenant structure. Lawlessness increases before denial appears. The Scripture identifies the remnant not by novelty, but by obedience and faithful witness. So ask yourself this: if deception targets order first, shouldn't understanding covenant structure matter now more than ever? Throughout the rest of this series, we will walk through each covenant layer one at a time, beginning where covenant always begins, with identity. We won't rush, we won't flatten Scripture, we won't skip layers. We will let covenant structure do what it has always been meant to do: bring clarity, alignment, and endurance. Next, we begin with covenant identity, who the covenant is with, and why everything else depends on that foundation. See you then. This has been an Ephraims Cry Hebraic Mindset Moment. If you found this teaching was helpful, please like, subscribe, and share to help others find these teachings. If you're looking to go deeper, Ephraims Cry Academy exists for that purpose. The Academy offers structured, in-depth teaching from a Hebraic mindset. That is, a covenant-centered understanding and how Scripture fits together as a unified and whole counsel of Elohim. In addition to the Academy, you can find further teachings and articles on our blog, as well as a growing library of study resources in our store, including printed study guides and downloadable materials for personal or group study. If you'd like to learn more, explore the resources, or consider enrolling in the Academy, you'll find the links in the description. You'll find additional teachings and related studies available here on the channel. Choose one of these videos to continue exploring.